This is a follow-up to our last tutorial. If you haven't seen that, go and do that now and then come back. Hi, I'm Mark Waller. I love finding magic in the world, coming back into the studio, painting it and sharing it with you guys. So we're going to make a beachscape. We're going to create the illusion of it being early morning and lots of that lovely white light. And we've got our background in here. And now I'm going to start building up colour and layers to create the impression of this wet sand, the horizon, the shadows in the clouds, and basically create that lovely, moody, sort of misty summer morning. So one of the things with this tutorial is we're investigating the way light changes from close to the light source and into the shadows. So what I'm going to do, I wouldn't normally do this, but I'm going to mix up the colour that I need here, the colour that I need here, and the colour that I need here, so that I can put the shadows and shadows in the clouds, but also represent them in the wet sand and also represent them in the whitewash. So I'm kind of being efficient by mixing up all three colours at once and then gradually moving from the shadows into the light source. So I'm going to get a little bit of burnt umber here, a lot of white, and some cadmium yellow. It's probably a little bit too much of all of them. I think that's pretty good. I'm just going to add a little bit of dioxazine purple just to warm it up a little bit. So I'm actually going to make that my second colour, believe it or not. I'm going to pinch that part, put that there, and add the white to that. So I've got a paler version of it. And a tiny bit of yellow. Okay, so I've got my first two colours. Now I'm going to mix my third one. So this one's going to have a little bit more French ultramarine blue. Whoops, too much. And a little bit of burnt umber to warm it up. And I quite often hold this colour next to the surface of the canvas just to see that it's right. Okay, and now I'm going to mix another colour up, which is a version of that, but darker again, and because it's in the bluer side of the painting, it's going to have much more blue in it. I'll just check that colour's right. Looks pretty good to me. All right, so I'm just pinching some of that blue that I mixed up last, and I'm just going to test it here, see how strong it is. Now, I personally think that's a little bit too strong, so I'm going to add a bit more white to that. Okay, so I've mixed that colour up, and I'm just going to create the impression of some shadows in the clouds. Now this is quite a dry brush, and remembering this is an exercise, so we're playing with light and shade. We're not too worried about some of the details. Okay, now while I've got that colour, I'm also going to represent those reflections of the clouds on the surface of the water, or the wet sand I should say. Now while I'm here, I'm going to pretend that that's my horizon there somewhere, and I'm just going to put a wave there and bring that across there like that. This will all be tidied up later on. And a little one in the foreground there, and another one there. Now I'm going to go to my second colour, or the next pale colour, and now this one should have a little less blue in it and be a little bit warmer. And take most of that colour off. A little bit too much there. Okay, and now I'm going to go to the lighter colour again, and I'm going to make that little wave come right across here like that. The birds like what we're doing. And now I'm just going to, probably a bit too much paint on there. Little tip, dry brush down, wet brush across works really well here. And I should listen to my own advice. Now, while I've got that colour, I'm just going to strategically here and there on the edge of some of those clouds suggest that there's some light hitting them. Another one there. And we should, in theory, be able to see some waves sort of starting to appear out of that mist. And now I'm going back to my whitest colour, and I'm just going to put some highlights there. And I want these ones to be barely recognisable. Just a suggestion of colour. I'm getting pure white now. And the good thing about painting this way is you kind of get to test it all out incrementally and just see, is this working? Does it need a bit more light? Does it need a bit more white? A little bit more yellow here and there? I've grabbed a stiffer brush this time because I want to lay that white down fairly thickly. So I'm just doing that because I want to intensify that bit of light through the middle there and wash out some of that bit. Okay, that's the beginnings. Despite the fact that I'm a professional artist and very skilled, I'm still not 100% sure what colours I'm going to use here. So I'm just kind of poking around. And this is a useful way to think of it. Think of that as the blue part of the picture, and this is the yellow part of the picture. So anything that's over this way is going to have more blue, and anything over this way is going to have more yellow. So I'm putting that there. That's going to be my horizon. And it doesn't matter if it's a little too strong at the moment. We'll suggest a couple of other little waves here and there. Wave there like that. And I'm going to, it's not quite the right colour, but I'm just going to put a little bit of that colour in the shadows of the whitewash. We'll come back to that later on. So I've got this first colour here. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white to that, and then a little bit of yellow to that, and a bit of blue. And now I'm just going to continue that horizon along like that. A couple of waves here and there, and that's a fairly big wave, so we'll make that quite strong. And again, while I've got that colour, I'll just put a bit of that in the whitewash and a couple of little lines across there like that. That's painting in Australia. to go over this way a little bit. Okay, and now we're coming into the, see that, the yellow area? So I'm going to repeat the same thing I did before, adding white and adding yellow. And we should be starting to get the suggestion of the ocean receding off into the distance, and we've got some intense light up here where the clouds are, and really nice solid foundation for a picture. Okay, so now I want to bump up some colour in it. It looks a little bit bland to me, but we're going to stick with our warm to cool thing as we have the whole way along. I'm going to get a bit of warmth into here and gradually push out some cools out here. Get some white, and I want quite a bit of yellow in there, like that. Not enough. There we go. And a tiny bit of dioxazine, a tiny bit of dioxazine purple. There we go. That'll be enough for the moment. So I'm just going to push that in there like that. And I'm not taking a lot of time with these clouds here because I want to create the impression of a whole pile of them out on the horizon that are all kind of broken up and patchy. And now I'm just going to put some of that colour in here, because whatever happens in the sky is definitely going to happen in the water somewhere. And now we're starting to see those lovely golds that you get first thing in the morning. So it's been a little while, but we've had floods, COVID and camera things, but we're back. We're back. So I'm just going to mix up some French ultramarine blue, a little bit of cadmium medium yellow, a little bit more blue I think, and some white, because I want to start making some more, I want to establish the waves a little bit more. This should be a wave halfway between the dark area and the light area. Now, one of the whole premises of this painting is that we have a white area, a yellow area, and then we remove off into the blue area. So everything we do will relate to that dynamic. Just going to add a little bit of blue to this part here, and I'll add some yellow to that later. And I'll put the blue in the blue part of the wave, or the blue part of the picture I should say. I'm just pinching a little bit of yellow and a bit of white. And now I'm coming into the yellower part of the picture. Now that sound you hear is my fingernail or my fingers dragging on the canvas. It's not the brush. It's so that I get the distance right. It's a better idea to have a clean brush and get the colours right than mix the colours with a dirty brush and get it wrong. So I've got pure white here and I want to put the sun about there. So I'm just going to get in there like that. And so now, because this is my sun, all of the reflections in the wet sand will come down in a line roughly along that line there. And it's difficult to get coverage with white sometimes, that's why I'm using the free flow, because it covers really well. But also, it flows very well, which is nice. I can draw out those long lines. But even so, I'm still going to need to go over this a couple of times, even with the free flow. So what I'm doing here is I'm defining the waves by painting the reflections on the surface of the water to create the impression of the high spots. What we want to do is create the impression of the face of the wave, because the sun's out here, face of the wave being in shadow slightly. Now while I've got that white out, I'm just going to get some highlights. On the leading edges of those clouds, or at least on the edges facing back towards the sun. Now I've got a bit of paint left on this brush, and I want to just soften that area up. So I'm going to drag a dry brush across there. So I've sort of tidied up the surface of the water in this area, and I want to do the same thing over here. So what I'm going to do is mix up sort of this sky colour and then reflect it on the surface of the water. Now quite often, if you've got a lot going on in the clouds, I would combine all of these colours plus the cloud colour and then reflect them there. But because it's mostly sky, I'm just going to leave it mainly that colour. So the colour is mainly white, French ultramarine blue, and I'm going to put the tiniest bit of cadmium yellow in it because the whole picture has been tinted by cadmium yellow medium. Just a touch more, and it's just a little bit too clean, so I'm going to add a little bit more cadmium yellow medium to that, and that should get us out of trouble. Never hurts to drag a little bit across. You know, the wet sand sort of reflects light from all sorts of different directions, so pulling a little bit of colour here and there across is never a bad idea. So what I want to do now is I'm going to start working into the darker areas out here in the bluer part of the picture, and then I'm going to work back into this area, but I'm going to do exactly what I've done the whole way through, and that is cooler colours out this way, so more blues, and then gradually come back out this way. But I've put a little bit of colour up here in the sky, so I might start putting a little bit of that in the whitewash as well, just to keep that transition. What's happening up here is going to happen down here, because water's highly reflective. So I'm just pinching a bit of that French ultramarine blue and a bit more cadmium yellow medium. I'm going to make an executive decision here. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of dioxazine purple to that, because I just want to warm that whitewash up a little bit and make it a little bit darker. That might be a tiny bit too dark. So there's a bit of white. There we go. So I'm just going to put in the bottom of that whitewash. So whitewash tends to sit a bit flat on the surface of the water, because the surface of water tends to be flat. And I'm just going to do that. Just going to drag that softly across there. And because the texture in the canvas sometimes makes it a bit grainy, if you just wipe your finger over it, that can soften it up a little bit. What I like to do every now and then is just a little bit of that, because eventually we'll put some suds here, but it's nice to put a few little shadows in there. If I get them done quickly now, not too strong of course, save some work later on. So now I'm going to move into the warmer area. So I'm going to add some cadmium yellow medium and a tiny bit of dioxazine purple. A tiny bit more there. Okay. And that, I'll just put that there because that part of the wave is going to be quite dark, because we'll put some light shining through the back of it, but it needs to be quite dark at the moment. It's quite steep. A little bit out there. And you'll notice the warmth of that colour now starting to show through. And I'm just going to dampen that brush a little bit. It's a little bit too thick, that paint. And now I'm just going to soften up that transition there, coming out of the shadow. Like that. Here. And again, you'll notice I'll sometimes go backwards and forwards in here. As I said, light bounces off water in very strange ways, so it doesn't hurt to, you know, push some of those colours into areas where they maybe you might not think. So I've done this area over here, but this side is now needs to be represented. So I'm actually going to push this colour over into this area. And I think I'll make that wave break there, just because I can. Okay, I'm just going to repeat the process, add a little bit more yellow and a bit more cadmium yellow medium. All right, so I've changed brushes now, and what I'm going to do, still a bit more of that French ultramarine, that dioxazine purple. Because I've already got that colour there, I'm going to keep staying with it. That's too purple. That's looking a bit better. I want a sort of a bluey, greeny, grey colour, like that. I think I can make it paler than that even. Let's see how that goes. So I'm just going to put this intermediate colour in the whitewash. So this will be the colour that is sort of between the shadows and the highlights. I'll bring that right up there. Same thing down here. I want this one quite narrow, so I'm just going to, it's a little wave in the foreground, so it has to be a little bit smaller. Just putting a little bit of that same colour, just the tiniest smidge on the top of that whitewash. And I'm going to thin it right out and just put some suggestions of shadows in the suds that the wave leaves behind. The sun's starting to shine through the back of that canvas a little bit. The sun's come out and that's a little bit strong, but while I've got that colour, I'm just going to push it in there like that, and then we'll go and have a cup of tea. So what I'm doing now is I'm mixing up the colour to represent the waves almost with the sun directly behind them. So I'm going to add a little bit of dioxazine purple to kind of redify it a little bit. I'm quite happy with that. Maybe a tiny bit more yellow and the tiniest bit of French ultramarine blue. I want it slightly greeny, sandy colour. I reckon that might do us. So now I'm just going to represent these waves further out, like that. And you know, if the colour's not quite right, it doesn't matter, we can always put a glaze over it later on with some yellow in it or something just to adjust it a little bit. And this colour also now becomes the highlight on this whitewash. And here. And here. And that will dry back a little bit darker. Now here's a little tip. As we get closer to the light source, so this colour is a highlight over here, but then it starts to become a shadow in here. So what we'll do is we'll start putting some shadows in the suds, like that. And they will become a little stronger as they dry, but for the meantime, they're just there to put a little bit more interest in the shadows, or create some shadows maybe even in the suds. Doesn't hurt to sweep across a couple like that. And then they also become the suds out here. I want a bit of glory now, so I'm going to introduce some bright colour. I'm going to get some phthalo blue and some cadmium yellow medium, because I still want a kind of a warm green. And I'm going to add a bit of white to that, like that. Probably a bit more yellow. And now I'm going to create the impression of the light shining through the face of the unbroken waves. And what that'll do is it will give it a bit more light and add a bit more colour to the picture, but it'll also separate the impression of whitewash from broken wave, or unbroken wave I should say. I quite like getting that colour, very, very thin, little bit of brush, and just kind of creating the impression of a couple of little waves in here. Little ripples in there that the light's shining through. I'm just going to repeat that process again with some yellow, some white, and I'm going to repeat that process again, more yellow, really bang up the yellow in the yellow part of the picture. So I'm just going back with the pure white. And I'm just going to reinforce this area in here where the direct sunlight is. Make that quite intense actually. I'm going to drag it over some of those areas there. A little tip with white, if you leave it so that it's slightly transparent, it tends to go a little bit blue, which means that out here in these bluer areas, you can actually put it down and it sort of goes a bit blue and it doesn't look out of place. Just using the corner of the brush there, I just want some really delicate little lines to suggest that, suds. And those tiny little white washes as the wave makes its last little fizz up onto the sand. And just pushing out the highlights on these whites back into the shady areas. And you know, one of the things about this kind of picture is it's a little bit like a seesaw, you know, or a pendulum. You kind of swing a little bit one way and then swing back the other way. And if for some reason this area over here, this white gets too strong, I just mix up a very thin wash of blue and make that blue area blue again. Or make the yellow area yellower again. I'm just going to keep re-establishing this white as it dries back. Actually, painting whitewash works better if you go over it multiple times. It just gives that lovely layered effect. So at this time of day, there's a lot of glare, and what I've done by painting all of this wave, or giving this area some definition, I've actually diminished the glare, and I really want to get that, bump up that glare again. And dry brushing is fantastic for that. So I've got neat white paint, and I'll do a band through here that's quite white and soften it out that way. Then I'll get some cadmium yellow medium, add that to it, and do the same thing out there, and probably up here, and then gradually push out a little bit into the blues. But I don't think I'm going to need to do too much out there, but I really want to get this part really, really intense and create the illusion of that early morning, bit of salt spray in the air and a lot of light bouncing around. Now you'll see when I had a lot of paint on my brush, I pushed it into that area that I wanted to be really intense. And as the paint diminished, I came out into this area here. Now with a very dry brush, drag that over there like that. Now I want this quite strong, so I'm going to load my brush up again. And I want that quite strong there, so I'm happy to get most of the paint off the brush in that area. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to add cadmium medium yellow to that, or cadmium yellow medium I should say. And one more. So I've grabbed me some white here, getting some cadmium yellow medium, a tiny bit of dioxazine purple. That's a little bit too much. That's about right there. Just get a little bit in there. So I'm just going to where those clouds are there like that, bring some down like that. And now just very gently drag that over there. So I've got this firmer, thicker brush, and I'm going to scoop up some interactive, and I'm going to really scrub it in here to really push in that solid white. Just got a little bit of neat white free flow here, and I'm just going to strengthen up or tidy up the edges of those waves like that. Here and there, really bang up that white a bit. So the whole idea with this picture was starting with a very simple colour palette and working or creating the impression of that really early morning softer light, which I think we've done. But you can also see that we could make this picture much more sophisticated if we wanted to by adding more colours. But there's some really, really nice theories in this that will translate very well into all of the other paintings that you do. Even though it might be a relatively simple exercise, it actually has tentacles that will help in lots of other areas of your painting.